Moody's fired a warning shot to the U.S. last week, saying the U.S. could be the next on the downgrade list. Our next guest says the U.S. government should heed the warning. Kevin Hassett joins us now from Washington, D.C. He is the Director of Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute and a Bloomberg contributor. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us this morning. How much risk is there to America's debt ratings? Will the Bush tax cuts extension stretch the deficit to a point where downgrade is inevitable?
Yeah, I think downgrade is looking inevitable. In fact, I was surprised when I pulled out my Bloomberg tools last week and started to look at it. You know, Japan was downgraded, and some people were saying, well, it's not so bad. Japan's debt is about double that of the U.S. relative to GDP. But, you know, Japan has a rating of AA-. If we go back and look in history at where Japan was when they lost their AAA rating, which is what the U.S. would be looking at, then it was, you know, back in 2001, and their debt rating wasn't much different from ours. If you look at debt held by the public, they're actually below where we are now. If you look at gross debt, which includes things like the money we owe Social Security, then it was a little bit higher than where we are now, a few years off, but not that far. And frankly, I think the odds of getting off the trajectory to where Japan was when they were downgraded are close to zero. And so I argue in my Bloomberg column that I think, frankly, that they should be U.S. should be downgraded today, that there's no chance that we're going to go 10 years without a downgrade.
All right. So, Kevin, it should be downgraded today, but you know how these things work as well. When do you think it is likely that we see a downgrade from any of the three ratings agencies?
Well, you know, we're already seeing harsh warnings from the ratings agencies. The U.S. is going to be put on some kind of watch list sometime soon. I mean, the fact is investors need to be very wary of this, because if you buy the day before a big downgrade, it's going to cost you some real money. I think that the ratings agencies are going to be under increasing pressure to push harder, because the fact is that President Obama, in his State of the Union speech, effectively cut his fiscal commission off and, you know, sent him out to sea on an iceberg. And so it doesn't look like the federal government's going to be very serious about deficit reduction. Even if the Republicans try something, they probably won't be that successful. And I think when that happens, when that's apparent, that the rating agencies are going to have to at least give a very harsh warning about the U.S.
So a $1.5 trillion deficit, we know that's pretty much what we're aiming for this year. I mean, what's the worst case scenario? I mean, the U.S. can't possibly default.
Well, in fact, the U.S. could default, because don't forget the default just means that the U.S. unilaterally changes the terms of the debt. And that happened twice before in U.S. history. If you go back to right after the Revolutionary War, then we stopped payment on some of the debt that we incurred to pay our soldiers for about a decade. And back in the 30s, in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt had told people, we had promised people when we borrowed their money that we'd pay them back in gold, and Roosevelt switched it to paying them back in dollars. That unilateral switch of the terms of the debt, that's a default. And I could see us doing something like stretching the term of a bond because we can't refinance it right now.
But even to the extent, Kevin, I mean, the two examples that you gave were pretty extreme circumstances, right? A civil war, which we're clearly not in right now, and a Great Depression, which we are also not in.
Oh, but we are just coming out of the biggest crisis since the Great Depression. So the question is, how far deep in do you have to go? And if you run the debt numbers in the U.S., then we're going to be in much worse shape than we were at any time in U.S. history with regard to government debt in the near future. And so I think that these extreme situations are the only thing that we have to go on, because our current situation is so extreme.
Kevin, thanks so much for the time. A true heads up there from Kevin Hassett. He is the Director of Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. He is also a Bloomberg contributor.